long ago, there was a vast multiversal war. Countless unique timelines battled each other for supremacy. But then the all-knowing timekeepers emerged, bringing peace by reorganizing the multiverse into a single timeline. Now, the timekeepers protect and preserve the proper flow of time for everyone and everything. Stepping off your path created a Nexus event, which left unchecked could branch off into madness, leading to another multiversal war.
Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be my new Loki Secret Wars video, and for Kang the Conqueror, explaining how they set him up in the Marvel Universe during Episode 1 and his connection to the Timekeepers and the Time Variance Authority. So if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. I'm doing videos for all the episodes. We're also doing a giveaway for Disney Plus memberships. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and post all your theories about Kang the Conqueror in the comments. Careful for spoilers from everything that happened during Loki Episode 1 if you have not seen the episode yet. But a lot of people saw that scene, the history of the TVA, as narrated by Miss Minutes, who's played by Tara Strong. She's the voice of Miss Minutes, if she sounded familiar. But during that, they describe a big multiversal war, which essentially is Secret Wars. It also helps set up Doctor Strange 2 Multiverse of Madness, which I'll explain in a separate part of that big history scene. It's a big info dump. There's so many Easter eggs just in that one animated little short movie that they played in the episode. But Secret Wars refers to a couple major crossover Avengers-level events from the comics. So there's the 1980s Secret Wars, which a lot of you may remember if you're old enough. The story of that is very different from what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the more modern Secret Wars. During the original 1980s one, that was the Beyonder just testing Earth's heroes by bringing a bunch of them to a place called Battleworld and just making them fight each other Battle Royale style. That's also the event where Spider-Man got his alien black costume. It was called the alien costume when he first got it. Later they retconned that to be the Venom symbiote. That history video during Episode 1 describes the more modern Secret Wars Multiverse War event, where you have all these alternate versions of the characters from the comics being funneled into a single world after the collapse of the multiverse, and it remixes a lot of tropes from the original 1980s Secret Wars event, but the scope is much bigger because you're dealing with so many alternate versions of the characters from different eras in the comics. The difference in the Loki series is that they're sort of introducing time travel is a much bigger factor in this multiverse war. But also this multiverse war that they discuss in this history video sounds a lot like Kang War in the comics, which is basically the new Avengers team with a different roster of new characters, like you have the Falcon version of Captain America, Spider-Man, a couple other different characters, versus Kang teaming up with a bunch of alternate versions of himself from different points in his own timeline. And yes, this middle timekeeper, the second one here, does look very much like Kang. I mentioned this during my Loki Episode 1 video. I'll follow up on this in a second too, because this is where we start to connect things to Kang the Conqueror in Episode 1. But a lot of you are confused about the timeline here, like why are they saying Secret Wars in the MCU happened in the past? The reason why Miss Minutes says that it happened in the past is because the Timekeepers themselves didn't come into existence until the end of time, the end of this current version of the multiverse that we've been living in during the Marvel Infinity Saga movies since Phase 1. A lot of you were asking if the Eternals characters were aware of the Timekeepers, if there's any connection between the Eternals movie and what they were talking about during Loki Episode 1. The way they set the TVA up during Episode 1, they basically erase people's minds anytime they come in to fix things in the past, and they didn't come into existence till the very end of the multiverse, so it's unlikely that the Eternals know about what's going on with them, because they were created much closer to the beginning of the multiverse. So you have someone much later in the timeline manipulating things, it'd be easier for them to erase all knowledge of them from beings that lived earlier in the timeline. The Timekeepers themselves were actually created by this being called He Who Remains, who was literally meant to be the last person left alive inside the multiverse. That means the Galactus had died, that means the Celestials had died, but he creates the Timekeepers and empowers them to control the flow of time, and then the Timekeepers go on to create the Time Variance Authority and this big citadel at the end of time and start reorganizing the timeline, which is basically a reference to the sacred timeline that they talk about in the episode. So this really wondrous place that they're at in the episode, the Timekeeper Citadel, wasn't created till after the Secret Wars event happened in the future. So for them and everyone living here in this little pocket dimension outside of space-time, Secret Wars happened a long time ago in their past, but for the other Avengers characters in present day after Avengers Endgame like Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Thor, this big multiverse war hasn't happened yet. The connection to Doctor Strange 2 Multiverse of Madness actually happens later in this little explainer that she's giving when she starts talking about Nexus points. Miss Minutes says that if enough Nexus events happen and the TVA doesn't fix them, erase them with their time reset devices, it could create enough branching timelines alternate realities, leading to a new multiversal war at a different point in the timeline. What did we see that other version of Loki do at the end of the episode? Who possibly Lady Loki, early theory about who that is that they're chasing down. She steals their time reset device, preventing them from stopping a new Nexus event. So it sounds like she's going around creating more Nexus events. And that becomes one of the connections to Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness. There'll be some more connections to Doctor Strange 2 in Loki Episode 2 as well. So I'll point those out during my full Episode 2 video next week. But Miss Minutes very literally says too many Nexus points could lead to madness in the multiverse. So it sounds like the way they're setting things up in the MCU with Marvel Phase 4 on the road to Secret Wars is that Doctor Strange 2 Multiverse of Madness is still meant to be a really big bookend on this initial multiverse plot. Like, it'll get crazy with how big the movie is, with the idea that Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch team up and they prevent the multiverse from collapsing and this other villain of Doctor Strange 2 from completely taking over the main MCU universe. But the movie itself serves as more of a prequel, like an appetizer to a full-blown Secret Wars event where you actually do have a bunch of alternate versions of the characters battling each other for supremacy. Battle Royale across the multiverse, throwing in the Fox X-Men characters or some of them. Hopefully they'll bring Hugh Jackman and Wolverine back for that, but that's the path to doing the craziest big crossover movie that you could ever think of. Like, you have a bunch of alternate versions of Iron Man, you have the Thor Corps with a bunch of alternate versions of Thor. Any crazy version of any character that you could possibly think of. The Russos also were talking about doing Secret Wars movies ever since Avengers Infinity War came out a couple years ago. They were just thinking about doing a series of Secret Wars movies. Like, you couldn't just do it as one movie. You'd have to do it Infinity War and Endgame style, where you break it into a couple separate movies. But connecting this back to Kang the Conqueror, so during episode 1, there's a bunch of Easter eggs for him specifically, and they changed some things about the timekeepers from the comics to make the connections to Kang the Conqueror seem even more obvious. So during my episode 1 video, I talked about how this second timekeeper in the middle here that they keep focusing on, his face, he looks very similar to one of Kang the Conqueror's faces. In addition to that, during the animated history of the TVA video, you see what they look like in full color. Their faces are blue, like Kang's traditional face from the comics. But the middle timekeeper here, the one who looks the most like Kang, also looks kind of like a depiction of Jonathan Majors as comic booky Kang the Conqueror. Jonathan Majors is the actor who they cast to play Kang in Ant-Man 3 Quantumania as the main villain. We don't know exactly where he is in his personal timeline during the events of that movie, because some versions of Kang later in his timeline are more evil than others, and he didn't start out being evil. But this is some fan art of him as comic book Kang. Does he not look similar to that second timekeeper? Also, some more evidence to back this up. During the episode, Loki makes fun of the timekeepers, calling them space lizards, because in the comics, they actually do look reptilian. Two of the timekeepers here, the first one and the third one, do look like they have reptilian features, but the second one in the middle, the one that looks kind of like Kang the Conqueror, looks more humanoid. Also in the comics, the timekeepers do make a contract with a future version of Kang to rule over this vast section of the timeline and keep order. That version eventually becomes Immortus and rules over all of time from a fortress that exists in an alternate dimension that looks a lot like the Timekeeper Citadel. And in the comics, Kang the Conqueror is also the longtime love interest of Ravonna Renslayer, played by Gugu Mbatha-Raw in the episode, as Judge Renslayer. She said that the Loki series is an origin story for her character as well, and the way they frame most of her scenes with her head transposed just in front of this middle Kang-looking face as the second timekeeper just seems like they're foreshadowing her connection to Kang, or her eventual connection to him in the future. She was actually asked about this specifically on Kimmel recently, about her connection to Kang on the series. She had a kind of awkward Marvel sniper answer, like, "Marvel will kill me if I talk about this." The vibe you get from her character in episode 1 is that she's kind of a goody two-shoes, kind of a teacher's pet character who just does exactly what she's told to do. Well, we're doing this, we're orchestrating the events per the Timekeeper's wishes because they wish it so. Loki sort of points out the ridiculous nature of this, like, how do you know what's sacred? How do you know what the Timekeepers want? And at least at this point in her story, she isn't questioning any of that, the sinister nature of any of this. So as Mobius and Loki go around hunting down these alternate Lokis, learning about more sinister things in the TVA, sort of pointing out some of these inconsistencies, like Mobius seems like he also kind of understands that what they're doing is a little bit sinister. Like, burn the place to the ground. Here, I'll show you to my desk so you can start there. It sounds like Ravonna Renslayer's story arc in the series is also discovering some of these dark truths too, like she finds out that she's possibly been misled this whole time as well. If you haven't read a lot of Kang the Conqueror stories as well, he's also deeply connected to the Fantastic Four, and obviously we're getting a new Fantastic Four movie really soon. He started out in the comics as just a normal human living about 1,000 years in the future. He was born Nathaniel Richards, distant descendant of Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four. He became a scientist fascinated with history and used time travel technology that had been developed by Doctor Doom in the past to travel to ancient Egypt, where he set himself up as the pharaoh named Rama-Tut, naming Apocalypse the Mutant as his heir. Later, he comes back to fight the Avengers in present day with his traditional Kang identity, and then eventually he just pops up in the comics at several points later in his own timeline with different identities. Like he becomes the Scarlet Centurion version of Kang, then he becomes Immortus. There are a bunch of alternate versions of Kang throughout his timeline. There's a teenage version of Kang that becomes Iron Lad in the Young Avengers comics. So we'll see which version he's closest to when we see him in Ant-Man 3. My assumption right now is that we'll see him both as the more human-looking Nathaniel Richards, and then they'll do a version of his origin story, or it'll play out in flashbacks. Somehow we'll see his origin story becoming the full comic book Kang. Hopefully at the end of that movie, just setting him up as a larger Avengers villain. He's just way too powerful and way too big of a character and way too connected to all of these big different comic book events for them to kill him off one and done in a single Ant-Man movie. Also, fun fact too, talking about big twists with the Time Variance Authority, like everything seems kind of sinister, like somebody is being played here for a fool. I know everyone's wondering if Kang is secretly manipulating all of this sacred timeline business for his own personal goals. He does do that at a certain point in the comics when he becomes Immortus. But also there's a really cool setup moment that I hope that they pay off later this season. When Loki is getting his sentence handed down by Judge Renslayer, he says, "You bureaucrats won't dictate how my story ends." Most of the MCU characters so far have referred to Loki as the god of mischief, but mythologically, Loki is also known as the god of stories. So we'll see if they're trying to set up some similar type of Agatha Harkness twist with the Loki series, like, give me Agatha all along, but make it Loki. It was Loki all along. What greater trick could the god of mischief pull than having another alternate version of himself have a hand in manipulating the TVA in the timeline himself? Tom Hiddleston was also hyping up Loki Episode 3 and Episode 4, like this 2-episode arc, as some of the biggest stuff that they do on the series. Like, he's most excited for people to see Episodes 3 and 4. So it sounds like those will be episodes where they reveal what's really going on. They kind of paced out the WandaVision series in a similar way, where it was like the last couple of episodes where you start to find out what's really going on with Agatha Harkness and Wanda's chaos magic. But if we see any more Easter eggs for Kang the Conqueror or other versions of Loki that might be manipulating things in the TVA, I'll point them out in my future episode videos. My full episode 2 video will post Wednesday just like normal, but I have a couple other bonus videos planned before that. And if you did spot any big Kang the Conqueror or Secret Wars Easter eggs during the episode that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. Everyone, click here for my full Loki Episode 1 video, and click here for my Loki Episode 2 trailer video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys tonight.